This show is supported by Notch Beer, and that makes me so happy right now. We've been telling you guys about Notch Beer for a while now, and things are booming like you would not believe. They opened their new location at 525 Western Avenue in Brighton, minutes from downtown Boston. Just like the original spot in Salem, Mass., they're brewing and serving European-influenced beer in their beer hall and beer garden, and they also have a live outdoor performance and music space. Not only do you get some of the finest brews around, you can also hear music outdoor in the venue or go inside, and there's a DJ spinning vinyl. And if you know me, you know I love vinyl. The indoor and the outdoor locations are both cool. There's a lot of space. It's a great place to hang out. Their beer is also available at retail locations throughout Mass and Rhode Island and through mail order direct from Mass and PA. If you haven't tried Notch yet, it's about time you do. Get yourself a Notch beer, or better yet, head over to Notch Brewing and tell them Twisted Rico sent you. Welcome to Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Ricardo, and this week we'll be playing you an interview with a legend. Unless you're a behind-the-scenes geek or in a band or a sound engineer at a venue, the name might not mean anything to you. Bob Czaykowski. I didn't say his name once during the interview because I didn't know if I was even saying it right. You might have heard of him, or you probably didn't, but anyone that's a geek like me has. Nite Bob, as he is known, is a legend among roadies and techs and band members. He's done it all. Now, I only briefly met Nite Bob while the New York Dolls were touring back in 2006, and the Charms were opening for them during their 22-city tour. And I didn't really get to know him very well, but I've read a lot of his interviews and I've listened to a lot of his podcasts. And other than a few brief email exchanges and being urged to get him on the show by my good friend Greg Allen, who has a connection with Nite Bob through his association with the New York Dolls, mainly the late, great Jerry Nolan, I asked him to do the show and mentioned he was coming on to a few people like John Bianelli, who's been working with Aerosmith for years, and I saw his reaction right through the text message of how excited he was to have him on. Now, we've had guys behind the scenes on before. Reverend Hank Pierce, Tom Wilson, Darren Hill, Curtis Casella, Sweet Lou Mansdorf, one of the all-time greats, Rick Hart. They've all been on this show, and having been behind the scenes most of my music career myself, I know everything that goes into getting the musicians signed, recorded, on tour, and then if you're lucky, getting them to do interviews, because a lot of them don't like to do interviews. It's a lot of work, so naturally I can relate to the people behind the scenes, and that's why I wanted to get Nite Bob on the show, because he's a legend in the business. This is going to continue, by the way, because I have Nancy Burrill on the show next week, who's spent many years promoting punk and hardcore bands when no one else wanted to when she was in Philadelphia, and she wrote a book about it. I'm excited to have her on next week. So Nite Bob has spent 50 years touring, doing stadiums, arenas, theaters, clubs, radio broadcasts, internet broadcasts, live recording, label showcases, television appearances, videos, movie shoots, USA, Japan, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. Bob has done it all. In particular, Bob has worked with bands that have changed people's lives, and changed American rock history, like the Stooges and the New York Dolls. He also worked with Kiss, Aerosmith, REM, and had a 12-year run with Steely Dan, and the list goes on and on. We're going to play this interview for you shortly, but let's loosen things up a little and play some rock and roll. To get things started, from the Heroes and Villains album, this is the Charms with the song Touch. Man. So what was the last year and a half been like for you? Because I know you're a guy that likes to keep really busy and you haven't been able to do much, right?
I think it was a really good break. It gave me my ears a break from doing live shows, right? And really, for the first time in a long time, I was able to really think things through without distraction, without someone calling up, wanting to advance a show or ask a question or can we do this? Or do you want to do this? Or how are we going to do this kind of things? It was very quiet on the touring front.
Do you listen to a lot of music and stuff when you're not working on tours? And
I'm always listening to music. I mean, that's what got me started in this whole journey was just the enjoyment of music, So yeah, it was a good time to, like I said, to be able to have sit down and listen to an entire box set of UFO live recordings.
That's a good one. I got to babysit Phil Mogg once for 2 days when I was at Metal Blade Records, and I pick him up at the hotel at 10 in the morning. He's like, "First things first, take me to get some beer." And we go. And then he did every interview that we wanted him to do all day long as he had beer. He was a happy man.
He's British, yeah. As soon as they pop out of the womb, they hand him a Newcastle Brown. It's the lifestyle, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, at least he didn't get Schenker.
Right? Why would that? Michael Schenker's a little rougher.
Let's just say he's an unusual personality.
Yeah,
I mean, he's a brilliant musician, but a lot of times being brilliant as a musician brings other aspects of your life are a little bit more unusual than the average everyday guitar player. Great guy, I mean, I've never had a bad. I hear these. You hear about all these episodes, but that's I'm telling you, everybody has an episode somewhere in their life, so you can't be judgmental.
I'm glad we're talking about a guitar player because I know you started off as a guitar player playing in bands.
That's correct.
You gradually moved behind the scenes. How did that all get started for you originally?
Okay, here's what I was a guitar player in a band, right? And through a friend of mine, Tom Fabianski, we were both in high school together, and he was like an audio guy, right? And so we got together. He had some gear. He started doing the PA from, providing PA for my band, right? And as he got busier, I started to actually pick up some of the extra work from him and gradually got into the audio thing. Through that, I met another band. I started doing some shows with them. And they had a guy who worked for them who said, listen, he goes, I can get you a job in New York City where you run a rehearsal studio. And when it's not booked, your band can rehearse there for free. and you'll meet a lot of people in the music business in New York, right? So I thought that was a really, really good opportunity. So I took the job, which went from like 4 to midnight, and within a month, I realized that the water was way deeper than I thought as a guitar player in the music business. I mean, like my first day in the job was dealing with the Mahavishnu Orchestra and the New York Dolls.
Whoa.
Right? So, yeah, right. Kind of a broad sweep of music there. And, I did 6 weeks of rehearsal with Johnny Winter. Right. So I saw all these bands. I met all these people. I met David Krebs, and next thing you know, I met all these English guys, these English roadies. I met those who were working for Peter Frampton, Frampton's Camel, and you begin to network. And then one of these British guys said, "Listen, I've left Frampton's Camel, and I'm going out in Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and we need a fourth guy on the PA crew, and you know your stuff, and why don't you come along and do it?" So I left the studio job and went out for 4 months at Emerson, Lake and Palmer with a quadraphonic PA.
That is a pretty good start.
It was a pretty good, as a jump into it. Actually, before that, I'd started to do, one-off gigs. I'd done a lot of one-off around town, and then I did the Stooges at Max's Kansas City. Right, that was an interesting week, I must say. It's all documented in books, blah blah blah. And I'm very knowledgeable about backline and electronics and all that kind of stuff. So it was an interesting, high energy show. I'd never seen anything like it from 2 feet away, I got to tell you. And 3 months later, their tour manager called me up and said, "Listen, we have these 2 shows in Detroit, and we need your help." And I was really excited to be offered a job, with a recording band, and they said, I go, "I'm in." And they said, "There'll be a plane ticket at the airport for you, and just come right to the Hilton Hotel. We got a room for you, and the gig is at the Michigan Palace." And I went. And when I came back, I went and did these shows, which are pretty notorious because they show up as one of the shows shows up on that Metallic KO bootleg that everybody, if you're a Stooges fan, everybody knows about, right? And when I came back to New York, everybody, the way people viewed me was very different. I wasn't the guy who ran the cool rehearsal studio. I was also the guy that someone believed in enough to fly me to another city to do shows, right? So people looked at me different. And that's, then I went to Emerson, Lake and Palmer to the New York Dolls to Aerosmith, blah, 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 ad infinitum. And that brings us to me and you talking today right now.
Yeah, let me take a step back for a second here because
Sure.
This is all great, man. This is great. I wanted to ask you about one thing before we got into the Stooges because they were first on my list. Is it true that you would fly to England and buy Marshall amps and then bring them back to the States and sell them? I heard that somewhere.
That's very true. That's very true. At the time, flights to England were very inexpensive, right? And the dollar to pound conversion was beneficial to the Americans, right? So, a pal of mine, we would get a flight, we'd fly over, we'd get a hotel, and then we go down to Denmark Street, which is like their version of like what used to be 48th Street in New York, where all the shops were.
Okay,
right?
Times Square.
And then we'd buy Marshalls and Hi-Watts for like, I'm not kidding, $80 to $120 each. And then take them back to the hotel, box them up, and check them as excess baggage. And back then, there was an urban legend that the English Marshalls sounded better than the American Marshalls, and that you had to run them on 220, right? So rather than 110. And so we would also go down to, the surplus stores on Canal Street and buy, step-up transformers and sell them off.
You never had any problem getting those on an airplane? Like as baggage? Really? Wow.
No, you slip somebody a 20. Listen, the New York Dolls, I'd put whole backlines as excess baggage. I'm serious.
Wow.
I'm serious. I mean, sometimes we'd be at the counter. If they wouldn't pick it up on the drop, you'd have to bring it to the counter. So you'd be rolling like a couple of cases with some drums, some 4x12 cabinets, head cases, and an SVT. And it would say New York Dolls on it, right? And the guy behind the counter and goes, "Wow, that's some big luggage." And you look at it and he goes like, "New York Dolls." And the drummer, Max Blatt, went, "It's a puppet show. This is in 1974, right?" And you go, "Oh, must be some big puppets in that big case where we're going." And for $20-$50,
That's incredible.
things are very, very, very different. Can't do that now.
When you get started in the early 70s, which I always say is, for me, like the greatest period for rock and roll, there were so many great albums and tours and everything. And you were like right in the middle of that. And I read in an interview that about the Stooges, you said that you work with them because no one else would work with them. Is that true?
It is true, but you have to understand the context, right? The context was to do that show at Max's Kansas City. Right, the show was on the second floor of the venue. Right,
yeah, I remember.
Had to go up a long line of stairs up there, and their order for gear was like they were playing a concert, and they wouldn't. Their tour manager said, "Nope, that's what we need." And I'm like, "Place is small," and it was like whatever, but. So nobody else wanted to do it, so I took the gig because first of all, I knew that. I had a guy who was just a walking muscle, right? Who could carry 2 4x12s up those stairs with no problem. Just to, if I bought him a beer, he'd be okay.
Yeah, you also ended up saying though that the Stooges changed your life, in the same interview that I read.
True. Yeah, it's true. It was you go to shows and you see shows and they're very professional, right? And you do rehearsals with bands and they're, on a certain level, it's all about, getting things right, right? And I had started to, attend New York Doll shows, and that was because they were rehearsing there, and they said, "Come see your show." And there was a certain kind of like off the rails frenzy that I found like enjoyable to watch, and plus there were probably there were more women at those shows than you'd see at a Mahavishnu Orchestra show, but so it was a good and it was really interesting because like the band and the audience were like all this one thing. There's very little definition between band and audience. If you see pictures of the Mercer Arts Center, you'd understand what I mean. That it's sort of like the band kind of was part of the audience and the audience was part of the band. It was very unique, right? The Stooges, it was a band that was, I guess you have to say that they knew that it was like they're screaming towards disaster or whatever, and they were really trying to play as best as they could and almost beyond their means, and it was a fury, man. It was like energy, just like they'd start, you'd be upstairs in the dressing room and there were just like, 5 guys from Michigan sitting around there talking about, stuff, and they'd realize, yeah, it's great to have a job in New York City, I'd sit there and just listen, right? Then they go down there and they'd launch into this stuff, man, and it was like a nuclear bomb going off. And I didn't mix those shows. I was a backline guy, and I was about 5 feet away from the band on the side of the stage, and I had never seen anything like it. And it really made me rethink about what is performance. And they had to, when in talking to them once, they had this thing about being able to let go, to just sort of I guess to them it came from listening to all this freeform jazz that was prevalent in Detroit at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to say like, yeah, we went out there and we sure let one go, and just like where it was, you just went with what was happening. It was changed my my focus from these bands that were like rehearsed to death. And I remember going to see when I was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I bought tickets to 2 nights, and I was shocked that the show was exactly the same the second night. You know, I mean, there
It
was
wasn't
no
like that with the
variation.
Stooges and the Dolls at all, probably.
No,
Yeah.
no, 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 not at all. And I kind of enjoyed that. You know, it was kind of like that with Aerosmith too. You know, there was a, you know, you always felt that at any point there could, you know, the train would go off the tracks and there'd be a train wreck. And you know how it is that the train, you know, a car crash or a train wreck is much the most exciting part of a car race, you know, or a disaster movie, you know. So
It must have been really exciting for you having had worked with the Dolls and then going back with Johansson and Sylvain when they got back together and did all their tours. You were pretty much their tour manager when they
yeah,
started touring again. I saw a bunch of
yeah,
those shows because the Charms,
hmm,
who I
right,
managed, opened them, and
right,
and every show I saw was just mind blowing. What really was funny was when I was at the Beachland Ballroom in Cleveland when I met you briefly. It's the only time that I ever got to talk to you, but it was only for a minute.
hmm,
I remember standing out there with some people and we were watching Johansson smoke a cigarette on stage in the no smoking venue. And
oh
everyone's
yeah.
like, how come he's smoking and no one else can smoke it? I'm like, it's fucking David Johansson, man. You know,
Part of the show. It's, it's,
he, he,
I actually explained to a fire marshal that it was a prop, that it was part of the show. And he actually bought it for a second, you know, he was like, well, Tom, you can't do that anymore. I'll tell you, there was a David, what's his, Donald Fagen would also light up no matter where he was on the planet, except in the plane. Right.
wow.
Yeah, and sometimes I said, you know, these guys, you know, when they're in the midst of a performance, they don't, you know, they just do these things, you know. It's just like, do
Were
I
you,
have to?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. So no, I
Uh,
was done. Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, were you surprised by the huge reaction the Dolls were getting when they got back and went
No,
on tour?
no, no, because you know it's a cultural thing, right? You know, these bands they break, you know, boundaries, and they do new things, and they never really, you know, it was a very tight, small audience. They went, you know, in the '70s, they culturally were significant, financially were not successful,
Right. Yeah, they
right?
became more
And
famous them and the Stooges are more
see, but that
famous now, you know?
see, that's the thing. It took 25 to 30 years for the culture to catch up and realize the significance of what they had done. I mean, it happens in art too, where, you know, it's like a very famous artist, Al Hansen, once said to me, he goes, you know, what's really bad about art? He goes, like, you don't get famous until, like, you know, 10 years after you're dead. Right. And then, well, what good is that? He goes, like, your estate makes all the money. So you put in the work, you get nothing. And then you die. And then everybody, because there won't be any more of your work, that everybody starts paying more, you know, more money for it. He goes, that's no good. He goes, he's actually the one who said to me, he goes, you know, you got a really good thing going, you know, you're really good at this music thing. Because I was an art student. I went to art school, and he said, I think you should pursue this music thing. And this is an important point. He goes, like, it's very difficult to monetize something that you love, because he says, this is, you know, he goes, you should save art for yourself and find something else that you enjoy that you can make money from.
That's
Right.
a good
And
quote.
it's an interest, you know, you know, it's an interesting concept to
Yeah.
say the least, you know. So it's true.
Kind of related to what we're talking about. You, I guess you saw the original Heartbreakers, and I
Yeah,
found another quote from you, and you said when they were on, nobody could beat them.
that was true. Try and find this. There's a recording of them at this. Oh God, what it is, like the summer of '77. They played a couple of nights at this venue in New York. Right, it's a live recording, and you could. It was like they're unbeatable.
And
You
for
know,
people that don't know, I'm talking about Johnny Thunder and the Heartbreakers,
right,
not Tom
right.
Petty. Right.
Right. It was, yeah. It was Thunders, Jerry Nolan, Billy Rath, who I believe was from the Boston area, and what's his name? Walter
Walter.
Lord.
Walter
And
Lure.
they're
Yeah.
all gone,
Yeah.
just like the
Wow.
Ramones. They're all gone. Scary, right?
Yeah,
All the
very
dolls are
much.
gone except for David. You
Yeah,
know,
Sylvain was such a good guy. I got to work with him
a
on some
very
dates up here with his
really nice guy.
solo tours, and I really liked him. And everyone that ever he hung out with us all night after show one night and just talked to every single person. Then when I saw him at the Underground Garage Festival, and then later on the Dolls tours, he was the same guy. You know, he
Oh
was
yeah,
always a
no, he
nice guy.
he was like the balance, from all the edginess, from like Johnny, there was Syl, right? And he was a brilliant guy. I really, really wish I'd bought a hat from him. I'm not a hat guy, right? And at one point, when he wasn't making money, he was making hats and jackets, and he was living in Atlanta with his significant other, right? And at one point, he said, "Listen, I'm making a nice hat for like $150." And I was like, $150? I was like, okay, nah, I don't know. I go, let me get back to you. And I never did it, and I kind of regret it now,
Yeah.
But he was a really good guy. You can't complain.
Yeah.
My life is better for him being in it for that period of time.
I believe that. Switching gears a little, you spent 12 years working with Steely Dan. Were you mainly like Walter Becker's main guy? Is that the job you had? Because I saw this thing called Inventory, and I'm like, Inventory? What's that? That's everything, right?
Okay, no. Here's the deal, right? I was my dear friend Skip Gildersleeve, who's a Detroit guy, right, who I met doing shows in the early '70s at the Michigan Palace with the New York Dolls, right? He went on to work with Rush, and after a long time with Rush, he wanted to move to New York, and he started working for Steely Dan, right? He called me up once and he goes, "Walter Becker needs someone to record some rehearsals." And I said, "For Steely Dan?" He goes, "No, it's a solo project." And he goes, "I usually do it, but I've got this Brian Setzer thing to do." And I was like, "If Skip can do it, I can do it," right? So he was a guitar tech, right? So I went down, and I had worked with Steely Dan at that rehearsal studios, which was called Baggies. They came in to rehearse for 2 days to do this thing, ABC Rock Concerts, where they used to film a show and then broadcast it, and the audio went out over an FM radio too, a very early in-concert series kind of thing, right? So I met Becker there and did those things, went over, did the show, helped them with the show, and off they went, right? So then I walk into the studio, Becker goes, "I know you. You worked in that dump down in what is now Soho." It's like, yeah, hell yeah, nice to see you, right? So he tested me really in an interesting way. He made me record these rehearsals on every kind of media, right? Mini disc, cassette, reel to reel, direct, direct to, CD, all this. It was a test. It was, and I passed the test. And at the end of these recordings, which later went on, he said, "I could use a guy like you." And I said, "I'd love to mix your band." He goes, "Oh no, I got a better job than you for you." I became the road manager for what you call a party, which would be him, Walter, and Donald, a tour accountant, tour manager, me, and whatever with either of the two wives who travel with us. It's a good gig. I mean, you fly around in a private jet, you stay in nice hotels, right?
That is a good gig.
It's a great gig. It was a great gig. I got to tell you, I looked at it as the payoff for all those times of being on buses and waking up to the smell of stinky socks and like people partying in the back lounge and stuff like that. This was like a good payoff. But the inventory thing comes from, at one point, Walter Becker came up with the phrase GAS, which is Gear Acquisition Syndrome. Not only did he coin that phrase, but he was he's the poster child for it. Right. So when I started working with him, he had 12 guitars and 7 amplifiers. After his passing, when I did the inventory of his gear, there were 650 guitars, 350 amplifiers, and I love saying this, 1,300 pedals.
Oh, right. My God.
His wife had no idea. No idea, because she said, "I hear he has a lot of gear." And I went, "Yeah," because she would never let me go down to SIR Studios. She goes, "I need to come and take a look." I'm like, "Okay." So I took her to the locker 11. Locker 11, we used to call actually locker 10. We used to call Studio 10 because it had recording gear that we never used. He worked on 3 records, and then he'd lose interest, and we'd watch Russian military plane crashes on YouTube. But he went into these processes of really digging into guitars and amplifiers, and he purchased a lot of guitars. I built him 14 guitars to experiment with different kinds of woods and pickups and things like that. And
That's incredible.
This was a 2-year project, right? So now I'm a big vault of knowledge of all this stuff. And he also, I got to give him credit. He got into this thing of supporting American small builders, amp guys and guitar guys and pedal guys, especially, because he felt that if these guys are just trying to make ends meet every day, and if they're doing quality work, you should support them, right? And because then you'll have nothing. If you don't, everything will be made offshore, and and you won't have this kind of quality, And you could also get these guys on the phone. You could call Gio Han, who builds these Han guitars, or Adam Grimm at Satellite Amplifiers, or any of these guys, and just get them on the phone and ask them a question. If you try to call somebody a Fender, it takes forever. You go through menu after menu to get to this guy, and then you leave a message for Billy, and he'll call back in 10 years. You know what I mean? So he became a patron of the musical arts in a way. That it was enjoyment for him, because the two, like all musicians say, the 2 hours on stage are the greatest, right? It's those other 22, that become like a drag. And what they would do is they base out of one city. I mean, I stayed in Chicago for 6 weeks on one tour, and we just fly out every day to a venue, a place.
Wow.
Yeah, hour and a half away. Hour and a half plane flight. You land, you do a sound check, you have a nice dinner. They play the show, and you're back on the plane, you're back, and you sleep in the same bed, which is great for me because I didn't have to move them.
That's pretty cool.
At one point, just to move Becker, it was like 4 to 5 bellmen and 5 carts to move all this stuff. And both of them were having recording stuff with them, because they were based in the city, in case I got an idea. And I'm like, okay, it sounds good to me. What am I going to say? It's like, it's like, okay, I set it up, hang out, It was funny because at one point I complained that my proletariat background would not allow me to eat at a Four Seasons or any of these high-end hotels. They go, what do you mean? I go, like, listen, I come up from a working class background. I go, paying $32 for a hamburger is not in my, I said, I'd rather eat local and, support, independent places rather than chains, right? So he goes, okay, this is what's going to happen. He goes, I'm calling the tour accountant. I'm picking up your room service, and you better use it. So that was my proletariat background.
Wow.
Right? So it was interesting, you better use it was the operating principle there. So I was like, okay. I would invite other people from the entourage, like, because usually they're in a hotel a block away. So, a nice hotel, but not a Four Seasons, right? So I would invite his guitar techs, plural, 2 of them, because there was so much stuff. Or, various band members who, or something, they'd come over, have breakfast with Bob or something like that, and just, so there was a lot of gear. I learned a lot. He was a very, very smart guy. He could argue the sky is blue for hours if you wanted.
Well, sad to hear about his passing.
Me too. I mean, he was, a brilliant guy. I'm better at a lot of things due to just having to answer some of his questions, and just listen, to his thoughts on things.
Yeah.
People thought they were just like jazz guys from LA, which is not true. They're East Coast guys. One was from Passaic, New Jersey. The other one from Forest Hills. They went to the Fillmore East. They could tell you that, Becker used to say one of the best bands he ever saw was the Youngbloods.
Nice.
And they like, they go, did you go see the Mothers at the Garrick Theater? This is all 60s stuff, right? And they went and saw these bands. Donald spent the Summer of Love in San Francisco trying to get into a San Francisco band. So there's a lot more to them than people know. So and go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's so much, Bob. There's so many things we can talk about. So I mean, I knew that you would want to talk about Steely Dan for a little while, and I appreciate that. I wanted to
Yeah.
hit you up on Kiss for a minute because
Woo!
you said somewhere I've listened to a lot of interviews and stuff. That's why I know this.
Good. I like people who do research.
I did a lot, and this blew my mind. You said that you saw Kiss open for both the New York Dolls and the Stooges. Now that's pretty incredible. Did they really?
I don't think the Dolls. Yes, that was correct. The Stooges, no, not no. That's a misquote.
Oh, they
If I
did know.
said that.
Okay, I must have misheard that one.
But I've seen this. Well, okay. Actually, I take that back. That is not. They were Kiss when the Stooges played New Year's Eve, 1973 into 1974 at the Academy of Music. Right. The bill was Blue Oyster Cult, right? The Stooges, local New York band Teenage Lust, who people should check out. They're a very interesting band. And at the last minute, they tacked on Kiss. And I had seen Kiss play out at Coventry, right? And I was like, really, those guys, right? Little did I know that, like, what was that, 73? That, like, I don't know, 15 years later, I'd be flying around Europe with them, during the Crazy Nights tour, But yeah, actually, you're right. They were like they played for like 15 minutes, and Gene set his hair on fire, and I thought it was some kind of comedy show. They loved it.
I think a lot of people saw that at the beginning.
Well, yeah, but, I get it. I mean, if you watch the document, did you watch that documentary that they've had up?
I've watched bits and pieces of it. I'll be honest with you. I'm not the hugest Kiss fan in the world. I have seen them with and without makeup. I actually met Paul and Gene at different times. I totally respect what they've done. I'm not the hugest fan. Yeah. Ace was the guy that you mostly worked with, and he was the one I liked the best.
Well, he's the people's guy. He was he was like the guy in the class, who always could, say something funny, and like he had a very, basic kind of style of playing that people, I mean, some people, they'd look at, a Joe Perry or and say, I can't play like that, or look at some of these other, guys in Rush, it's like, that's a lot of work. You listen to Ace and you go, if I apply myself, I could probably play like that.
You did a lot of solo tours with Ace too, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Well, he's a good guy. I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, like back in '87, I had Fraley's Comet opening up for Alice Cooper, and that's like my next.
Nice.
I've got Ace Frehley special guesting on Alice Cooper starting in mid-September, if it happens.
That's gonna really. So that's something new. Wow, and that's gonna be your first comeback because you've been on a break for a while, right?
Yeah, well, I've gone out and done some shows. I did a couple of shows 2 weeks ago, and like I'm like, well, I didn't get sick, and that's a plus, because I have a friend who was fully vaccinated who went to see a band play, and then 2 weeks later, he got sick, but it wasn't, he tested positive for COVID, but it was, it was just like a case of the flu.
That's what I'm hearing.
It was, so it's like, that's what I'm saying. Is it going to happen? I mean, I watch the news and I'm like going like, I don't know. Let's see what happens here. I know the Black Crowes are out. There's a good litmus taste.
You worked with Rich, right? I think I saw somewhere that his solo tour or something. Mm-hmm. Was that a club tour?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. 500 to 800 cap kind of things. There was the Crowes fan base is pretty deep. So they would come. It wasn't like we wouldn't pay. Some shows did better than others, but for the most part, they came out. And and some of them would get, he didn't play that. He played only one or two Crow songs, and I guess that they, because he was pushing this band thing, So sometimes people would be like, hey, you didn't play Wiser Time. And it's like, and of course, who gets this response? Me, because I'm sitting out there. And I would turn to him and go, "What's Wiser Time?" And then they get even madder. You know,
I
you don't
have
know the
to
history.
I have to
That's
ask you
right.
about Aerosmith because you were out with
Okay.
them from 75 to 78 and then again when the original lineup reunited from
All right.
83 to 87. It
Yeah.
must have been interesting seeing both versions of the same band but with different mentality going on.
Well, I look at this as like that is the same version of that band, right? And it's sort of like the real change came after with Permanent Vacation, because that's the next version to me.
Oh,
You
okay.
know,
You know what?
that's the
You're
way
right.
I
Yeah.
look at it. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. I mean, listen, everybody. It's like 10 years later, you've lived your life. And you've learned a lot of things.
I
And
I I
some were more appreciative of what they were trying of what they had than others. So
I guess
that that's
I was looking at it from like the post Joe Perry project era, I guess, like because
yeah.
Joe
Well,
left the band and
yeah. I mean, everybody who goes outside there's, it's like, I'm going to be really blunt about this. It's like you say Aerosmith, you can sell 15,000 seats. You say Joe Perry, you're doing 1,000 seats. That's
yeah.
true of anybody. ZZ Top, you're doing 12,000 seats. Billy Gibbons, you're hopefully doing 800. It's a whole different, I mean, it's marquee value. Not to, I mean, that's what the audience knows what they're going to get when you say Aerosmith, right? When you say Joe Perry, they're not as aware of, and tickets aren't cheap. So people are much more choosy, or they go on YouTube and they see something, they go, I don't like that. You know what I mean? It's sort of like you can. I think the concert prices thing is the biggest detriment these days, personally. But people go out and it's and they realize that is maybe you're not as famous as you thought you were, or you somehow were able to let this slip through your hands, and now you're trying to regain what you had. So like, yeah, there was, I mean, there were guys in that band who were exactly the same as they were, you know, when I first met them, right? And there were other guys who had gone through various, journeys of their own, and were now, I mean, still, you know, not as, let's just say, some of them, a couple of them weren't having as weren't distracted. Let's put it like that. That's a
Yeah.
kind way of doing it, and now, I mean, I saw them some play in Springfield, Massachusetts, like just before the pandemic, after the Vegas thing, right? It was really nice. I went and I saw them, I hung out with them, I spent time with each member, because we have a long history together, and it was good to see them. I thought they played great, right? And and it's like, there they are. They're an American band. They're doing, and they're out and they're playing. And it's like, with them, we're talking really like over 40. I did my first shows with them over 40 some odd years ago,
Yeah.
45 years ago. So the fact that they're still around and still playing good, I think is a plus, and like, look how, you should think about how the culture's changed, man. It used to be all about the record, and now nobody cares about your record. Nobody. Recorded music, it's at its lowest value ever in history. You have a couple of generations of people who love music who say, "Pay for music? Why?
Yeah.
I can listen to it for free on YouTube." And then it's like, then now you know why ticket prices are high, because there's no way for people to support themselves really anymore.
Yeah, I worked for labels most of my life, and when I saw that happening in around 99 is when it all started. And then
99 before that.
yeah, but I mean, it got really bad around that time. I was at A&M Records, and it's six
Hmm.
months after I left, they laid off everybody.
Yeah, well,
So
the turning point in history is Metallica versus Napster,
oh yeah, yeah,
right? Because they saw it coming, right? And everybody poo-pooed them, right? And who won? Well, the end user won, the audience won, because now they can get everything, they can listen to whatever they want for nothing, or, it's like, you have to realize that people are going to stop making records. You really think there's going to be another Aerosmith record? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, Becker had a really interesting slant on this. He said to me, I said, like, people always ask me if you're going to make a new record. He goes, look, first of all, everybody we knew, like, at the label is dead, right? And, like, now, you have their motivation is completely different. Who's going to give us the kind of budget to make the kind of record that we would want to make using the kind of musicians we want to use? And then the day after it's released, right? It's on Spotify or, on any of these, bootleg platforms, or people are just put songs up on YouTube, and you can have a staff of people taking it down. He says, but the horse is through the gate now. There's no way to get a return if you spent like $400,000 making a record. No one's going to, people aren't, only the over 40 crowd is going to buy a record, because that's part of their cultural thing of actually buying a record and looking at at the credits and things like that. A certain part of the audience doesn't give a shit about that, because it's not as important in the culture as it was, which is kind of sad. But
Yeah.
what I've learned is,
Yeah, and I was going to say, and that's why I'm getting a deal paying $74 for a Los Lobos ticket. I mean, it's like
yeah, I
the
know.
ticket prices have to be higher, because how are these guys going to survive? Because you're absolutely correct. There is
Well,
no income from record
well,
sales.
see, the other thing too is everything costs more, right? Gas
Yeah,
costs more, hotels cost more. Post-pandemic rental vehicles. Did you ever try and rent a car after the
I
pandemic?
have not.
Right? Go call your local guy and see if you can get rent a car for a day for less than $175.
Ugh.
Yeah, exactly. Because what happened with them is during the pandemic, a lot of them sold off their inventory of cars because people weren't traveling. And that's where most people, rent at airports. You know what I mean? To
Yeah.
fly to Dubuque, Iowa, rent a car and drive to see grandma, or whatever, and it's a weekend rental and all that. And it was happening all the time,
It's a
I'll
whole
tell
new
you this,
world,
that
man. Whole new
it's
world.
a very different world. Look at the price of gas. I was driving by a gas station yesterday, and it was like, really? Over $3 for a gallon of gas. Hotel rooms, the same thing. If you even in like, I was looking for a hotel room by the beach, right? And
Forget it, man.
a red roof inn was $200.
Yeah, I'm going
$200.
away for a couple of days. I needed to get away, and I was going to
Where are you
stay.
going?
I'm going to Western Mass because I can't afford to go to
I
any of
get
the
it. I was going to
beaches.
say I can hook you up on Cape Cod.
You're funny, man. All right, I'm not going to let you off the hook yet here, because I have
No,
one
keep
more
going,
thing.
man.
One more
Go.
thing I have to ask you about. One of my
Fine.
all-time favorites you worked with, a guy who I got to meet, I admire and I love, and I have to ask you about Ian Hunter.
Ah, very good. Yeah, he's really great. We'd crossed paths through the decades. He actually, I'd finished Emerson, Lake and Palmer, right? And two friends of mine, one of which who got me that first job in the music business, right? They were both working for Mott Hoople, right? And I was staying at the Continental Hyatt House, which doesn't exist anymore, and they were at the Aquarius Theater, and they said, "Come down, see the rehearsal." I go, "I love Mott Hoople," so I went down, right? And it was funny because Ian Hunter was let's just say that the emotions were high in that band, right? And like he said, at one point he goes, "I want you guys to pack up the PA into the truck and then take it out of the truck and set it up again." And I'm saying, I go, "Why do you want them to do that?" And he goes, "Because I want to see how long it takes." And I go, "You're a fucking idiot." And he turned to me and he said, "You're fired." Right? I go, "You can't fire me. I don't work for you." get out of here, right? So I was like, I said, wow, okay, cool. See you, fellas. And actually came back the next day and sat in the balcony and watched the show again,
And you
So,
ended up working for him years
yeah,
later.
so I'm doing it gets better, right? So, so roll the tape to like early 90s, right? And I'm working for Michael Monroe, right? Who's
Oh,
a
good one.
great guy. Yeah, really good, right? And he's doing these he and Steve Van Zandt are doing these weekly events at a place called, I forget. It used to be the Cat Club, but they're called the Grand. They were calling it the Grand. And he was doing like a Thursday night. And he'd have all kind of people come in and sit in with his band, right? So one time he had Ian Hunter, right? Who had written some lyrics for Hanoi Rocks at one point, right?
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
so
That's cool.
I'm sitting in the dressing room right next to Ian Hunter, and he goes, you look really familiar. And I go, you fired me in L.A. in 1974. And I go, for what? And I go, for calling you an idiot. He goes like, how do you feel about it now? I go, I'm really over it. I'm happy to see you again. Blah blah blah. And the Dolls had opened up for Mott, and I knew Pete and Buffett and those guys more than Hunter. And I'd done actually some shows with Mott without Ian, right? Opening up for Aerosmith, right? Then we roll the tape again. Next thing you know, I get this phone call that we need a front of house guy for Ian Hunter, and I'm like, okay, I'm in. And they go, you have to go up to his house and go to a day of rehearsal. And I'm like, okay. So I go up there. And I go in his house, and he's rehearsing. It's really great. And at one point, I ask him. I go, hey, let me ask you a question. He goes, shoot. I go, when was the last time you saw Stan Tippins? Right, Stan Tippins was the original singer for Martha Hoople, who was pushed aside by the record label because Ian Hunter looked more like Bob Dylan than Stan did. And he became their tour manager. This is very much like a situation with the Rolling Stones with, Ian Stewart, right? But
right.
all those during the shows, when it came to all the young dudes and some other parts, Stan would sing background vocals from behind the PA, right? So he goes, Stan Tippins? I go, oh yeah. I go, in a hotel room once, he showed me how to dance with a standing lamp. He goes, oh yeah, that's Stan Tippins. Right. Then I go, well, what about Richie and Phil? And he goes, you knew Richie and Phil were the two, the two Martha Hoople backline guys who, during the New York Dolls, we thought they were the two coolest guys on the planet. And it was funny because I actually, started talking to Phil on Facebook, and I said, we really looked up to you. And he goes, really? He goes, Richie and I really looked up to you guys. So it was kind of funny, but he is very, very, when people ask me about what artist made the most impact, he's right up there. He's right up there in
I
the
love
top
him.
10 of all time.
I got to meet him in L.A. when the
Mm-hmm.
Charms were on tour with them and the Zombies, and he was so
Mm-hmm.
cool. I sat in the Wiltern Theater in L.A. when he did his sound check, and he did Irene Wild, and he didn't even play it during his show. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
and I told him, I said, that's my favorite song you've ever written, and you didn't do it during the set. He goes, we usually play songs during the sound check that we don't do during the set, and I thought that was really interesting, man.
No, it is interesting.
Right.
No, he's up there, man. I mean, it's like I worked with, I haven't worked with him in 5 years. He's actually on a hiatus now. I don't know. It's funny you mentioned him because when I was thinking yesterday that I should call up, the MD of his band and go, "What's up?" I know he's still active online. He still answers questions on his website and stuff like that. But I'm not. They haven't played a show in easily 3 years.
Yeah.
And the last time I saw him was in that Mott '74 thing.
Wow.
Where it was like the 1974 version of Mott with what you call it. Basically, it was the Rant Band with him and what you call it.
When they
Ariel
did
Bender.
the tour in when was that, 2011 or something like that?
No. There was a thing they did like 4 years ago, which was only East Coast, and it was actually called Mott the Hoople.
Yeah, I remember
Right,
that.
because
Yeah, I missed it, but I
and
remember it.
it was Bender and I'd be so sad I can't remember the other keyboards players' names, but I'm really old, so what can I say? But those guys were original. Buff and Pete are gone, and I heard Allen is not well. Mick Ralphs is not well. I saw Mick Ralphs when I did Paul Rogers at the Royal Albert Hall like 6 years ago. But then he had a stroke, and now he can't play, but he's still in good spirits.
Mick Ralphs did?
So, yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. I didn't know that.
It is too bad, but he's here and he's cognizant. You know what I mean? He can. He just can't play. Anymore. So, but he was. I spent time with. I did Ted Nugent opening for Bad Companies. That was an interesting bill, let me tell you.
I wasn't sure if I was going to bring up the Nuge or not because he's not one of the more popular people as far as.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about Nugent, right? And I mean, his brother passed away like 6 months ago, and I called him up, and I do talk to him from time to time. And it's like, as long as he is to stay off his politics thing, he's fine. But once he gets going on that, I got to excuse myself. I mean, I always say this too, that out of all the musicians that I've ever worked with, he was the best parent. He worked a deal when he split from his wife that his kids would stay at the house and the parents would come in and out because his wife lived in Miami and he didn't want his kids splitting time between Michigan and Miami. Right, which I thought was a brilliant way of dealing with it. So his kids had a stable upbringing. So like 2 or 3 times a year, they weren't uprooted and moved somewhere else. Right. So I thought that was really brilliant on his part, and, and sometimes too, I think that he learned early on in his career that saying and doing outrageous things would, just appeal to his audience. Of course, now he's gone from an arena act to basically a club act, right? And and a lot of artists have, because they're, they didn't really, their audience didn't travel with them, or they just, moved on to other things. I mean, I'd go see him play. He's always good for a good argument. He can argue, boy, let me tell you, I mean, I had Fraley open for him in Jackson, Michigan, which was basically where one of his ranches was. That was interesting. His son is his tour manager. This makes me feel really old. I held that kid in my arms when he was born. Now he's a tour manager. I'm like, I'm going to fucking hang this shit up.
Well, hey, Bob, listen, man, you're great to talk to, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate you taking the time to come on, and I hope that you get back on the road again because so many people admire you, man. They need you out there, man.
Well, it's first of all, it's really great talking to you because a lot of times I do these things and people, don't ask good questions or just, I did one where it was like a Kiss-centric, 3 sides of a coin, right? They bugged me for years to do it. When I finally did it, they hadn't done the research, right? And I'm like, and I started yelling at them at one point. I go, I don't want to talk about Aerosmith now on your, I go, I know what your fan base, I know what the Kiss fan base is like. I see them all the time, I mean, it's sort of like, they want to know Kiss,
Well, I really appreciate that, man.
So anytime, man, give me a call. I'll be happy to talk to you again.
All right, man. Best of luck to you, my friend.
Okay, man. Take care of yourself. Be safe out there. Right. And buy a record. Buy a record too. Man. All right.
All right. Later.
All right. See ya.
this country, real gone and going for broke. Steady hanging on my throttle, let me out of the bottle. Cindy, well she's an inside joke. Hoodwinked once again, she wants to be more than just friends. Hoodwinked once again, she'll hang around to the bitter end. Hey, hey, hey. Feeling dizzy, feeling weightless, must be on the verge of greatness. How long can this heaven last? Slow motion moving faster, must be on the brink of disaster. Right now, I'm having a blast. I promise you a promise kept. Your secret with me is a secret met. In your eyes, your face, and in your touch. It's never meant so much, yeah, yeah. Hoodwinked once again, here comes another change in plans. Oh yeah, yeah. Hoodwinked once again. Bad news is a close and personal friend. Hey, 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 yeah. Hoodwinked once again. Hoodwinked once again. Hoodwinked once again. Hoodwinked once again.
That was the Neighborhoods doing the title track from the Hoodwinked album. Well, guess what? The Hoods weren't hoodwinked this time because Alternative Press magazine picked them as one of the 10 bands that made Boston one of the best punk cities in America. This really made me happy since I work with the Hoods on several of their albums, and nobody deserves attention like the Neighborhoods do, along with the Mission of Burma and the Nervous Eaters and the other bands that were on that list that Alternative Press put together. So I figured I'd throw a Hood song on in celebration of that lovely occurrence that just happened this week. Thank you, Alternative Press magazine. It was a little intimidating for me talking to Nite Bob, although he was a very cool dude and he made me feel relaxed. And I hope you liked that interview as much as I did. And I'm just happy that he came on the show. I wasn't sure if he would do it when I asked him, but he had no hesitation about it. And it was great having him on. And I like having people behind the scenes on the show. And I'm going to continue to get people like that. Like next week, Nancy Burrill, who wrote this great book called I'm Not Holding Your Coat, is going to be on. I'm really looking forward to that interview. So stay tuned to that. I want to thank everyone out there that supports this show on patreon.com/Twisted Rico. Every stinking penny or dollar in their case that you put up there on a monthly basis to the show. We really appreciate it. It helps pay the bills and keep the show going. You can write me at twistedrico@gmail.com. We have an Instagram page at Blowing Smoke with TR, a Twitter page at Blowing Smoke BS. There's also a Facebook page. And of course, we're on YouTube where you can subscribe and like the page. Many of the episodes are up there, audio versions. And if you don't like to go on Spotify or Apple or Google Podcasts, etc., you can always go on YouTube. Thanks to Mike Nash here at Voice Motel in Somerville for engineering the show. And you can check this show out, like I mentioned, on all those locations. And I didn't mention Anchor and Google and Breaker, and I want to mention them. So till the next time we say goodbye, this is Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Ricardo. Keep the rock and roll alive.